You don't own me. I'm not just one of your many toys. You don't own me. Don't say I can't go with other boys. Peace, peace, people. Welcome to We Are Our Ancestors, Yemima World. I am your hostess, Yemima, and it is always good to be black in the land of the living once again. I do not own the rights to the song that's playing at the beginning. It is by a woman named Leslie Gore. I don't know if she's in a relationship to Al Gore, but this is from the 1950s, and the song is called You Don't Own Me. I only played a short snippet of it because, again, I don't own the rights to it, but I want you to have heard the beginning of that song, You Don't Own Me. And again, this was from the 1950s, and it is a white woman who is singing this song. All right. So again, it is good to be black in the land of the living once again. I'm feeling a lot better than from the last time I was on. I was with the kids again this week, and this week was very trying for me. It was um, an experience for me. I had a group of pre-K students, and it was about 17 students, and about 14 of them were special needs, or what they say on the spectrum. One of the kids from the first class that I taught back in November, he was the only student in that class who needed additional attention, and they moved him from that school to the school that I was at this past week, which I thought was strange that they moved him into a class where 95% of the class is special needs. I would think they would have kept him there because he could have gotten the care that he needed, um, without sacrificing the other students who may not have needed that additional care. But hey, um, that's the public school. All right, so tonight we are talking about. We're still talking about. It's been a minute that I have done a episode about what's coming in January. A lot of things happening right now. I think the focus has been on immigration and them doing a mass deportation of the immigrants. But we can't let the other things that they have in store for us kind of slide, because what will happen is we will become so focused on the immigration and everything else that they have planned for us, we'll forget about, and then it'll all of a sudden sneak up on us, and we'll be like, oh my God. And it'll kind of take us by surprise because we would have forgotten about it because they keep pushing this immigration policies in our faces, and that's all you see on the news. They're meeting about it, but you can best believe that behind the scenes that there's some other part of Project 2025 or Project 47, whatever you want to call it. They're both the same documentations. They just have different names. Same thing as a flower and a rose. They're both the same thing. They just go by a different name. So, or I should say, a rose and a daffodil. All right. So I want to get into tonight. I want to talk about women's health issues, especially for African American women. Our bodies have been at the forefront of this government's power since the inception of this country. Um, we were basically brought here to procreate and to produce free labor for this country. Because if you think about when they first came here from England, it was just men. Women didn't come at first. It was just the men. They were here to, settle the land and blah, blah, blah. And then sometime after, they brought women. Now, when they got here, of course, there were women already here. You had the indigenous people, the first people that were here. And so, of course, they took their liberties with those women, but then they had to start building families, and so eventually they brought white women over so that they could build families and settle here. Once they brought uh, Africans here, they had to bring women as well. They didn't just bring African men. They knew that they were going to have uh, African women to build families and again to produce free labor. That was the first thing. Second thing is there ain't no way in hell they was gonna have these black Africans messing around with those white um, perfect women, and so they brought black women here during the Ma'afa, during the voyage of the cargo ships. A lot of our mothers were essayed. A lot of them, when they arrived here, were already with child. You have to understand that uh, the voyage was about 2.5, maybe 3 months. And those oppressors, those colonizers, those enslavers were going to take their liberties. They were not going to be out to sea for 3 months and not take their liberties with the women that were on the cargo ships. And so, from the get go, from the time that even before we left the shores of Africa, at times they have taken their liberties with our mothers. And so our bodies became a commodity and it became uh, property of the government. So I want to talk a little bit about that and some things that I pulled off the internet, of course. So I'm going to read this first and then we'll get into Project 47 and how those new laws will affect our choices about our body even more. In the context of slavery, female slaves were often forced to reproduce, meaning their bodies were considered property and their ability to bear children was seen as a valuable asset to enslavers, leading to widespread sexual violence and coerced pregnancies, with little to no agency over their reproductive lives. There was forced breeding. Slave owners frequently forced sexual relationships between enslaved men and women to produce more slaves, a practice known as slave breeding. Now, I didn't know this. I found this out a couple of years ago that Virginia, which is the state I live in, was one of the largest slave breeding states in the United States. I did not know that. Um, and a lot of times when they forced these relationships between enslaved men and women, they were relatives. Um, Sometimes it was brother and sister, sometimes it was father and daughter, sometimes it was mother and son. And sometimes they would even blindfold them so that they didn't know that they were having relationships with their own kin. I did read somewhere, I don't know how much of it is true, but I have read that the term mother, you know what, refers to of the enslaved men having to have relationships with their own mother. And that is where that term came from. I don't know how true it is, but that's what I've heard. Female slaves were subjected to widespread raping in SA by slave owners and overseers, contributing to significantly to forced reproduction. No control over family planning. They had no control over their reproductive choices, including access to contraceptives or the ability to choose their partners. Now, sometimes, as far as the ability to choose their partners, they did. Uh, they didn't. They didn't always have. They weren't always told who they were going to marry. A lot of times, they chose their partners, and it was a good thing because when they say they had no ability to choose their own partners, what that does, it dehumanizes our ancestors even further, and it makes it look like we don't have any feelings. We just go out there and lay with anybody they tell us to lay with. And that was not always the case. Yes, there were some overseers and some enslavers who would tell this person, this is who you're going to have children with. But a lot of times they fell in love. They loved each other, and even in bondage they made families together, so that was not always the case. When it comes to contraceptives, our ancestors were root workers. They could find herbs and plants that could keep them from getting pregnant, that could dry up their milk, uh, and also to terminate unwanted pregnancy. And so our ancestors knew exactly what to use. Did they use it all the time? No. Did they use it sometimes? You absolutely damn go and skip it. They did. Now, the constant cycle of pregnancy and childbirth, it took a toll on the health of female that were enslaved, often leading to complications and increased mortality rates. Now, increased mortality rates, and we're talking about in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, where they're talking about complications and increased mortality rates back then. And here we are in 2024, and the mortality rate of Black women during childbirth is still the highest, I believe, in the world. In the United States, it is the highest. So, if in 2024 the mortality rate for Black women during childbirth is high, and it was high in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, what the hell are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? The trauma of forced reproduction had severe psychological impacts on enslaved women. Uh, Absolutely. If you think about the fact that you have been SA'd, raped, and then now you have to carry this person's child just to know that it's going to be enslaved for their life, for a lifetime. Of course, it has psychological trauma, and it still does. It still does. Now, not all enslavers engaged in breeding. While it was widespread, not all of them actively participated in forced breeding, but the system inherently encouraged it through the value placed on enslaved children. Some enslaved women employed resistance strategies to control their fertility, such as delaying pregnancy or using herbal methods. Like I just said, our ancestors. Now, this is my first time reading this. So if I say something and then read it, it's only because the ancestors have already given me that information and has downloaded it, and I'm just regurgitating what they have said to me. Using herbal methods and delaying pregnancy was limited oftentimes, and it could be dangerous. All right, so let's read this. While white merchants and enslavers dominance in the transatlantic slave trade and in the New Worlds, slavery depended upon the control and exploitation of Black women's reproduction abilities. When enslaved women interfered in these processes, as they did often at various stages, they contested the terms and logic upon which the white supremacist patriarchy depended on. Enslavers enforced control over enslaved women's reproduction through various means. One way they ensured the population of production of a laboring population was through breeding. Again, slave breeding involved forced relationships between enslaved men and women, the rape of enslaved women by white enslavers, overseers, and slave drivers. Enslaved women also received incentives, although very limited, for reproducing and raising children on the plantation. Whites attempted to counteract the deaths of enslaved children through practices of forced breeding without changing without changing the unhealthy and hazardous conditions of pregnancy and childbirth, malnutrition, and exhaustion, which were all causes of infant mortality. So the women worked up until the time they gave birth. A lot of times they gave birth out in the fields. And a lot of times they may have given birth in the morning and they were right back out in the fields that afternoon. And from what I understand now, it used to be that when women would go to the hospital to have babies, they were there for a few days, almost like a week. Now the hospital pushes them out. I think the next day they go in, have the baby, and the next day they're home. I worked with a young lady, and we worked from home, and I knew that she was pregnant from the conversations we had over the phone, and it was a Friday and she didn't show up to work. And so Monday, when we got back on the phones and we were working, she was back at work, and I was like, "Are you okay? Everything all right?" And she said, yeah. And I heard the baby crying in the background. And I said, did you? She said, yeah, I had the baby on Saturday. And she was back at work. Even though she was working from home, she was still back at work that Monday. Because in these times, a lot of us are one paycheck away from being homeless. And so she had to go right back to work. Now, white doctors also participated in the maintenance of the plantation regime and of labor increase by overseeing and interfering in the births of enslaved children. Their involvement in Black women's childbirth and reproduction was exploitive as they violently experimented on Black women without anesthesia or their consent. This had a direct role in the development of modern gynecology. Nevertheless, enslaved women found ways to resist through traditional practices of childbirth led by Black midwives. They enacted a form of womb liberation by relying upon networks of care within the plantation community. The picture that you see there is a picture of James Marion Sims, who they deemed the father of gynecology. He used to experiment on enslaved women with no anesthesia. And some of the white nurses, they have said through oral stories and through stories that his methods were so criminal and so barbaric that even the white nurses couldn't stay in the room with him. If you have ever seen the TV show Lovecraft Country, there is an episode where Journey Smollett's character moves into a house, and there's this evil in that house. And the evil in that house is supposed to be the essence or spirit of James Marion Sims. When they're in the basement and they're trying to cast out this evil spirit, Journey Smollett's character will call out the names of the three women that James Marion Sims uh, practiced on without anesthesia. From what I understand, his statue came down not too long ago, which is great. Now, white enslavers, doctors, and pro-slave slavery activists. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Let me back up. White enslavers, doctors, and pro-slavery advocates villainized Black women's reproductive actions. They critiqued Black women's choices in regards to their own reproduction. Whites reacted with fervor to the few cases of, hold on. Okay, whites reacted with fervor to the few cases of infant, infanticide in which Black women killed newborn children, a highly unusual occurrence. But in one well known incident in 1856, the inspiration for Toni Morrison's beloved, Margaret Garner killed one of her children and wounded others in an attempt to the lives of her children and her own when faced with recapture into slavery. Margaret Garner was re-enslaved, and the incident was sensationalized as an example of a violent and monstrous Black mother. Enslaved women were also criminalized in cases they gave birth to stillborn babies or infants that died shortly after. Now, again, this is the 19th century. We're getting ready to go back into that. We're getting ready to go back into Black women being criminalized if they have a stillborn, they lose a child. They're going to find a reason for the Black woman losing that baby or delivering a stillborn child. So we're getting ready to go back to the 19th century. If you have not read about Margaret Garner, please read her story. It is it's sad, but it's important. Uh, Birth control and abortions may have been more commonplace than many historians have yet to acknowledge. Their relative routineness might provide another reason why they are not represented in the historical record. Hmm. Additionally, enslaved women's practices and treatment of abortion were different than contemporary understanding of abortion. which again, even today, we really don't have an understanding of what an abortion is. So many people think that abortion is just specifically Black women. I'm talking about Black women now. So many people think that Black women just get pregnant and or young Black women get pregnant, don't want the baby and go and have an abortion. That is not all that is included in an abortion. Certainly that is an abortion if they want to just terminate the pregnancy, but an abortion is also if there are complications and they have to um, end the pregnancy because of complications to the mother's life or health, complications to the baby's life or health. Anytime you end a pregnancy and it's not in a living child, it's an abortion. It's an abortion. Enslaved women did not necessarily conceptualize their actions and methods of birth control as what we would deem termination of pregnancy. Mary Jenkins Schwartz, a historian, argues the enslaved community treated inducing menstruation without judgment due to ambiguity about why the menses had ceased and when life began. This allowed enslaved women a degree of flexibility in controlling fertility without encountering resistance. Doing so, Black women developed strategies to resist the exploitation of their labor by interfering in pregnancy. Now, I remember a friend of mine growing up, and this is talking about how they could kind of control their menses, their flow. I remember growing up, one of my friends' sister, she was going um, out of town for a party or something, and she was expecting her menses, and she said, "I'm going to wash my hair in cold water." She said that will stop it from coming. Now I've never heard that before in my life. I don't know how true it is, but we know some stuff. But washing her hair in cold water was supposed to stop her flow from coming. And so our mothers back in the day, they could use different herbs and roots again to use as contraceptives and also to uh, control their daughter's flow from starting so that if their flow doesn't start, then they don't really have to worry about them being SA'd and wanting to produce children. And so they they kind of held it off as long as possible. Now, they've had contemporary debates over women's bodies that have led to developing restrictions to abortions. Here we are again, especially across the United States South. Many states, including Texas and Mississippi, have enacted laws which directly challenge women's access to abortion and even criminalize it. These laws defy the constitutional protections established in Roe v. Wade. The history of enslaved women's reproduction illuminates the sinister origins and violent strategies of such restrictions. The development and maintenance of white supremacy in the New World still goes on. All right, this is a story about a woman named Anne Maria Jackson and her seven children. They arrived from Maryland in 1859. In 1841, Mrs. John Little crossed the Ohio River and left behind a life of bondage. After a long journey, she was one step closer to her future life of freedom in Canada. She was enslaved in Tennessee before she and her husband fled slavery. Her successful escape from slavery was remarkable. Yet her story of her flight to freedom, which was recounted by herself, Little also recalled her own physical abuse and that of other enslaved women that had an experience that was all too common. Upon learning of her plans to flee, her enslaver beat and whipped her mercilessly. Ooh, that's a tough. During the punishment, the enslaver attempted to torture her till she revealed information about another enslaved woman. This other woman had defied his authority, but through very different means. The enslaver interrogated her about her knowledge of a woman who had put her child aside. She recounted. Before striking me, Master questioned me about the girl. I denied all knowledge of the affair. I only knew that she had been with child and that now she was not. But I did not even tell him that. Miss Little's enslaver was infuriated, not only at the audacity of her plan to run away. He was inflamed by the possibility that this unnamed woman had aborted her own child, an act that he treated as equally egregious as Little's fugitive plot. Both women, Miss Little and the unnamed woman, challenged the authority of their enslaver. Little did so by running away, and in the face of her enslaver's attempt to control her body, as well as the threat of physical punishment, the unnamed woman likely resisted by terminating her pregnancy. All right, so now that we've gotten over some history of how our mamas, grandmamas, aunties, sisters that were in bondage were treated and how their bodies was treated, let's look to the future, huh? Shall we? We've talked about the past. Let's look to the future and see what glorious future that those white men in power still have over our bodies. This is from Project 2025. The threat to medication abortion. Project 2025 proposes several strategies for restricting and ultimately eliminating access to mifepristone, mifepristone, an extremely safe and effective medication used in the most common regime for medication abortion in the United States. And I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, and I apologize. The plan proposes reinstating medically unnecessary restrictions on this drug that require in-person dispensing and limit who can prescribe and receive the medication by effectively ending telehealth provision of the method. These restrictions would limit access to the method for anyone who faces barriers to reaching a brick and mortar clinic, including individuals receiving telehealth care under the protection of shield laws in states where abortion is banned. It also recommends revoking that drug, um, the approval of it, which would remove the drug from the market entirely. Project 2025 also seeks to dismantle U.S. abortion access in a number of other ways. The plan calls on Congress to codify into law the Hyde and Weldon Amendments, harmful policies that limit access to abortion care in the United States by restricting the use of federal funds for abortion care and coverage. And again, we've been so conditioned by that word abortion that all we think of is that it's some woman that just wants to kill her child or unalive her child. That's what we think abortion is, and it's not always that. Um, it also proposes a full audit of Hyde compliance, including reviewing Biden administration executive action and Medicaid managed care in pro abortion states. These investigations may suggest an intention to retaliate against states where state Medicaid funds are used entirely legally to provide abortion care. In reality, the documented violations of the Hyde Amendment involve the opposite. States refusing to cover abortion care under circumstances where Medicaid coverage is mandated. So basically, what they're saying is, if you are on Medicaid and you have an abortion for whatever reason, those states will lose Medicaid funding, which means that people who are on Medicaid and men, you'll lose your Medicaid coverage, but you voted for this. Project 2025 aims to implement a broad anti sexual and reproductive health and rights agenda across the government, including by changing the mandate of key agencies and rewording policies to stigmatize and delegitimize sexual and reproductive health terms and concepts. So they probably going to reword some things so it'll look like that they um, are in favor of or uh, will allow certain things. But you are going to have to really look these policies up um, to see exactly what they're saying because they're going to do word salad. They're going to do word salads, and we're going to have to really be careful. Um, they portraying abortion as being unsafe. They break down support for abortion rights and bolster efforts to criminalize providers. So even those that provide abortions in states that abortion is legal, they're going to find a way to criminalize these providers. And these providers are not going to give up their income and they're not going to risk going to jail for one person. Uh, Again, they're going to weaponize federal Medicaid dollars where there will be states who have Medicaid, and if they find out that these states are using Medicaid funds to provide abortions, again, for whatever reason, whether it's medically necessary, the life of the mother, the life of the child, is not going to matter. They're going to pull funding from these states who have Medicaid. They're going to pull Medicaid funding, and again, that's going to affect not just the women, it's going to affect some of you men too. They plan to have, it's going to have a big impact on reproductive health worldwide. They're going to probably include foreign assistance. You know how women, so they want to ban abortions. Let me tell you what y'all need to ban. Y'all need to ban them BBLs. That's what you need to ban. Because a lot of women are dying from them damn BBLs. That's what you need to ban. Can you ban that? Um, the 6 weeks abortion ban is going to make it almost impossible for people to get care. They're going to have they're going to find ways to monitor uh, women's cycles. As I said before, when I was talking about how our mothers and grandmothers found ways to delay their daughters' cycles, they're going to find ways to monitor it. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, mothers used to monitor their daughter's cycle. They would check their underwear, once a month because we didn't know. I mean, we knew, we kind of knew, but every young girl, every time, every month, your cycle menses would start, and you weren't prepared, and you would have that, So uh, mothers used to check our underwear. I better see something red in some pair of underwear at least once a month, and they're going to start checking it as well. So yeah, I just wanted to come on and just talk a little bit about this. The past of what our ancestors, our mothers have been through, and what we're in for the future. We got to start preparing. If you know anyone that is a doula, uh, anyone who practice the ways of the ancestors and know about herbs and roots and things of that nature, please seek them out. Please seek them out because we are going to have to go back again to the ways of our ancestors and when it comes to our health, and not just women but men, black men as well. We're going to have to go back to the old ways. All right, so look, that's it. I just again wanted to talk about that a little bit. Again, they're throwing immigration in our face to keep us focused on that when behind the scenes, we don't know what they're doing. Anybody seen JD Vance since the election? We don't know what JD Vance is doing. He could be working on women's reproductive rights because he that has been his pet peeve. That has been his project, women's reproductive rights. And we ain't seen him. And I know where JD at. So he could be on behind the scenes working. So January 20th, one of the immigration might be on the back burner. We think it's going to be the first thing that they do, and they might change the whole healthcare system for women. So we need to stop listening to them and dig deeper into what's going on, and really do some reading on our own to prepare. We got to get ready. Unfortunately, we don't stay ready because we always got to get ready. All right, people, this is it for tonight. You know the drill. Love yourself, love each other, give yourself some grace, give each other some grace. Honor your ancestors, they will honor you. We are our ancestors. Like, share, and subscribe. Thank you all so much that have subscribed. I reached my 100 goal. I think I have 102 subscribers, and I'm so grateful. I am really, really grateful. Next year, I plan to grow the channel. You might even see my face next year. Who knows? But until next time, stay cool, stay warm wherever you are. It has been cold today in the 757 area. Until next time, peace, family.